When I was 16, I remember sitting at the table and trying to study for my math exam. And I would read the same paragraph over and over again, but for the life of me, nothing registered in my head. And it was around this time where Instagram had really taken off, and I would check my notifications every 10 to 15 minutes and scroll for a while. And I would tell myself that this is a well-deserved study break. So in short, my ability to focus was pretty bad. And the damage that this caused was not just limited to me having shitty grades, which is pretty bad on its own, but I also was someone who was very careless, kind of zoned out all the time. I would forget important deadlines, just misplace things, and I would just impulsively switch tasks all the time. I knew that there was something wrong with me, but I wasn't sure that what exactly it was and how do I even fix this thing. So over the past 6 years, I've immersed myself in self-help books, watched thousands of podcasts on productivity, psychology. I've experimented with countless diets, supplements, and mental frameworks, testing everything to find out what could truly give me back my focus in life. And in this video, I am going to condense that 6 years of research into 3 protocols that gave me elite level of focus. So much so that I went from someone who failed 3 subjects in high school to someone who was now working as a software engineer at Fortune 500 companies like Dell Technologies, AMD, Synopsys. From this person who could barely sit and study for 15 minutes to now being able to do deep focus for 4 to 5 hours a day. But these protocols that I'm about to share with you, they are not 5-minute hacks or quick fixes to your problem. These protocols did actually require me to make lifestyle changes. So if you're here looking for a quick fix, then perhaps this is not the video for you. But I promise you this, if you sit through this video, these protocols are gonna flip your life around. So let's get right into them. Looking back at my life now, I realized that I used to live a very fragmented life. And no matter what I was doing, whether it was studying, reading, working out, I always used to split up that activity by looking at my cell phone to check my notifications or scroll for a while or quickly reply to someone. And this behavior quickly became a part of me, so deeply embedded in me that each time now that I actually wanted to sit and focus and study, I would get the strong urge to be distracted or check my phone and break that activity. So every 10 or 15 minutes, I just literally had to look somewhere else or check my notification. And this is one of the reasons why I could never focus, because every 15 minutes, my focus was being taken away into a different task. And I know you might think that this is not all that bad, just checking your phone for a quick second every 15 minutes. It doesn't sound that bad, right? But the truth is that this is actually horrible. You see, when you want to focus on something, you kind of have to quiet down all the other neural activity in your brain and only activate those regions of the brain that are concerned with that task. But as soon as you look at your phone, task switch, or you're hit with a distraction, your brain has now neural activity in other regions of the brain. And now when you wish to return back to the original task, you once again have to quiet down all these other regions of the brain. And this process is not instant. It takes you a good 10 to 15 minutes to quiet them down. So just being distracted or looking at your phone for a couple of seconds doesn't just cost you a couple of seconds. It actually takes you 15-20 minutes to get back into focus. And it also takes away that cognitive ability required to refocus. And this is not where my troubles ended. There's this concept called being in a flow state. This is where you're highly engaged in a task, completely zoned in, focused. Time begins to pass quickly. You start feeling really, really good because you're just so engaged in this thing. And when you're in this zone, you're kind of happy. And even though you're working hard, you still feel rejuvenated in some sense. But because I was living a fragmented life where I actually had to break away from that activity after every 10-15 minutes, I never got into that zone. And this is why I sort of never felt that nourishing feeling, and I had this sort of void in my life, like a hint of sadness. And because of feeling a bit dim, a bit sad, and not having this nourishing feeling, I used to do activities that gave me more instant gratification, more distractions, and this in turn reduced my focus even more. So I was stuck in this vicious cycle for years. Once I realized that this fragmented way of living was a real problem in my life, I set up rules that would allow me to live distraction free. So one of the first things that I did was I actually deleted all the social media apps from my phone. Cold turkey, no if, buts, maybe I'll do it in moderation on the weekend. None of that. Deleted them all ASAP. Just by doing this, my tendency to impulsively grab my phone and start scrolling or checking notifications, this reduced by 50-60% because now there's nothing to scroll. And if I actually wanted to, I would have to download the apps from the Play Store, then sign in, and this was enough of a barrier for me to not actually want to do that thing. The next rule that I implemented was, and this is going to sound a bit excessive to some of you, but I actually started putting my phone on flight mode quite often. Anytime that I was studying, my phone was on flight mode. Anytime I was doing something important, phone was on flight mode. Anytime I was working out, my phone was on flight mode. I also used to put my phone on flight mode throughout the night and an hour before bedtime. And I would only exit the flight mode 2 or 3 hours after waking up. And I cannot begin to tell you how important this was. No more random calls from strangers. No more calls from the neighbor that are distracting you while you're trying to do something productive. No more stressful news at the wrong time. You know, if you get stressful news at night, it pretty much destroys the entire next day because you couldn't fall asleep on time, you woke up late, and all that causes a lot of chaos and mess in your life. Also, when I knew that my phone was on flight mode, the temptation to actually check it died down completely because I know I had nothing, no novelty to experience. So, and living this sort of distraction-free life without social media, without calls, allowed me to really submerge myself into the activity that I was doing. And now my day was no longer fragmented. It was rather continuous blocks of activities. And each of these blocks of activities, they were very fulfilling. Like 2-3 hours of studying, that's one block. Working out for 1.5 hours a day. Reading or watching a podcast for 1 hour a day, that became the third block. And I know there are probably 100 different thoughts in your head telling you why you should not put your phone on flight mode or why you should not get off social media. You're gonna miss out on trends. Your high school crush is going to try to contact you. There's going to be an emergency of fire, and if you don't respond, then the world is going to end. I've been doing this for like 3 years at this point, and it turns out that none of these things are actually true. It's all this fear of missing out in your head. And once you truly experience what it feels like to be 100% engaged in an activity without any distractions, without any temptations, you are forever going to be hooked to that experience. And over time, people kind of expect that from you, that, okay, this is the person who is not always available. He's engaged in other things. And they would kind of understand and be respectful of that. This brings me to my second protocol. And without this, you are going to be extremely frustrated and not see your attention span grow. So pay close attention to this. When I first noticed that my attention span was 10 to 15 minutes, I kind of felt shitty. But what made it worse was kind of believing that this thing is fixed, like this is innate, like my height or something, like I can't improve it. Some people just have a massive attention span and some people just have these tiny attention spans. And I thought I was just one of those with the tiny attention span. But the truth is that your attention span is just like a muscle. And just like a muscle, it can be trained and increased. Your muscles require some sort of resistance to push against. And just like that, to train your focus, you need some sort of challenging, complex task to push against. And that is exactly what I started doing. Every day I would sit down with a challenging task. Maybe it's my math assignment, or maybe it's learning how to code, or maybe it's designing a website. Something that was a bit challenging, and I would try to do it for a certain duration. The first few times I did it, I could only last for like 10-20 minutes. But every couple of days I would try adding 5 to 10 minutes to the study session. And then after a couple of days, it became 20 to 30 minutes. And then a couple of days later, I added 5 or 10 minutes more, and eventually it became 1 hour. Now, don't get me wrong, this wasn't as easy as I say it is. When you add those 5-10 minutes, it's kind of uncomfortable, it's kind of stressful, you feel a bit tired. But this stimulus is actually needed. This pushing against this resistance is actually needed, because that is what provides your brain some sort of an incentive to actually want to increase its focus. The best way to look at your study sessions would be to actually treat them like your gym sessions. Like, instead of training your muscles, you are now training your attention span. And after every couple of days, you would want to increase the resistance, increase the weight, increase the duration of your study session. I was able to achieve an attention span of 4 to 4.5 hours a day within like a couple of months of doing this exercise. And during the course of this journey, I discovered some important tips that would help you out. The first thing I discovered is that it's a lot easier to do this deep focus work early on in the day. Preferably as soon as you wake up, try and spend a couple of hours just doing this deep focus work. Because I realized that as you wake up and tend to delay that deep work task, your life tends to get filled with other sort of stressors, phone calls, worries, and then it becomes really hard to actually pay attention to your deep work. Because firstly, there are a bunch of other thoughts and stressors in your brain. Secondly, you're kind of cognitively depleted from dealing with those stressors, and that's what makes it really hard to focus on tasks at the end of the day. So having that deep work block or that study session, that mental training session early on in the day is what I would advise. I would have mine at like 5 a.m. I used to wake, and the first 2 to 4 hours a day, I would spend time in training my focus and actually doing productive productive work. Now, this doesn't mean that you become sleep deprived. You actually would want to sleep much earlier, like at 9 p.m. or 9:30 p.m. if you actually want to achieve the schedule. The next key thing I noticed is that after every 60 to 90 minutes of focus, you need to give yourself like a 10-15 minute break to rejuvenate your focus for the next session. And what I found was that the best kind of break is when you actually go outside for a walk for 10 to 15 minutes. Like an open, high ceiling environment, and there is nature, there are birds chirping, there's grass, there is trees. Because there's research that suggests when you take a walk in nature, you activate your relaxed state of mind. And being in this relaxed state is like being in recovery mode. So you rejuvenate focus a lot quicker. I've tried taking breaks with my cell phone in hand and scrolling or reading, and it actually does not feel like a break when I continue to the next session, because when you're looking at your cell phone, you're still kind of focusing at tiny objects. Also, the chances that you do not get that second session in are quite high, because you might just find yourself getting hooked to what's on your cell phone. The last tip that I would give you is that do not exceed focusing for more than 4 hours a day. I realized that if I cross this 4-hour mark, I would actually feel burnt out the next day and not feel as productive. And I know there are videos on the internet, people claiming that they're studying for 10 hours a day, 12 hours a day, but I like to feel that this is not a sustainable approach. Sure, you can do it for like a week or two, but long term, you're going to be burnt out from this approach. Another possibility could be that the tasks that you're doing are not truly that focus requiring. If you're able to do something for like 10 hours a day, perhaps that thing doesn't really require all that amount of focus. Maybe it's just replying to emails or just memorizing stuff. But if your task is truly challenging, like it's something like doing calculus, learning math, or programming, or writing a book, writing a script, then you are going to feel the burn after about 4 hours. So if you want the most return on your investment, try to do things consistently under 4 hours a day. The next protocol is something that only requires 20 minutes a day and has a massive impact on your focus levels, but it remains something that 99% of the people are not aware of. The first time I came across this concept of meditation, I thought this is some wishy-washy mumbo jumbo that does not really work, and this is something like old white people did. But boy, was I wrong. Once I actually started meditating consistently, I realized that my ability to snap into focus increased significantly. Earlier, it used to take me like a good 10-15 minutes to warm up and actually start focusing. But once I actually started meditating, it was almost instant. Like with a snap of my finger, I would be ready to focus on my task. Another cool thing was that I was now a lot more mindful of distractions. So previously, when I used to study, I used to kind of get distracted at times, and it would take me a while before I actually found out that, oh, okay, I'm thinking about something else. I have gone into this rabbit hole of thoughts. But once I actually started meditating, I was a lot more self-aware and mindful. The moment I would find myself drifting, I would immediately bring myself back to paying attention. You know how you sometimes feel that your body has a mind of its own and it does just random things impulsively, says yes to commitments that it didn't want to make, or just grabs its cell phone and out of muscle memory starts scrolling through? With meditation, I found that I was able to stop these behaviors. And this wasn't just placebo or something that was just in my head. Studies actually show that meditation changes various regions of your brain. For example, the amygdala. This is the region of the brain that is associated with stress. Studies show that when you meditate, this region of the brain actually shrinks, meaning you're less likely to experience stress and anxiety. The white matter of your brain, or the connective tissue that connects all these components of the brain together, that tends to be bigger in people who meditate. And this is why you're so mindful and so aware and don't do things impulsively, because those regions of the brain are now so well connected. Alpha brain waves, which are associated with being in a relaxed state and enabling you to learn and retain. Meditation actually increases the production of alpha brain waves even when you're not meditating. All these neurological changes that are associated with meditation, they improve your focus. Now the key question becomes, how exactly do I meditate? So back in the day, I used to think that when you're actually trying to meditate, you should not have a thought. And if you actually have a thought, then you failed the practice of meditation. But turns out that you cannot really control when you have a thought. A thought is always going to occur. So this is how I meditate now. I simply close my eyes, visualize the darkness, and then I try to maintain focus towards that darkness. And as soon as I find that I have drifted into a thought, a rabbit hole of thoughts, or branched into multiple thoughts, I'm mindful of that and I bring myself back to that point of darkness, that point of focus, and I continue meditating. And you are going to have to perform these repetitions over and over again where you are distracted and you bring yourself to a point of focus. This does three things. Firstly, it teaches you how to focus. And secondly, it teaches you to recognize when you are actually distracted and have lost focus. And thirdly, it teaches you how to quickly bring yourself back to a point of focus. When I first started meditating, I would only last for like 4 or 5 minutes before I start feeling uncomfortable and bored. But eventually, after a couple of weeks, I can now meditate for 15-20 minutes at a time. And you're going to start seeing positive changes in your attention span by week 2 or week 3. There is going to be an observable change in your ability to focus and be mindful. So these were the 3 protocols that gave me an elite level of focus. But the brutal truth is that none of these protocols are going to work if your foundation is broken. So if you're someone who has bad eating habits, or someone who's addicted to pornography, or someone who does not have a good sleep schedule, then chances are that your foundation is broken. You need to fix this leaky bucket, and filling it up with protocols after protocols is not going to help. So if you would actually like to work with me, fix this foundation of your life and implement some of these protocols in it, then click on the link in the description and you can book a call with me there.